October 21st, 2025, 2:47 a.m. Seltso in Russia's Bryansk region, a quiet industrial belt where furnaces glowed and shift workers moved between low-lit buildings as if nothing unusual was coming. Minutes later, residents saw a white flash behind the tree line and a rolling pressure wave that rattled windows far beyond the plant perimeter. Air defense crews scanned cluttered scopes while something low, fast, and pre-programmed threaded the hills and river bends toward a target selected weeks in advance. In those pre-dawn minutes, Ukraine executed what its general staff later described as a combined missile and air strike that included Franco-British long-range cruise missiles, a first openly acknowledged deep hit on a core node of Russia's war industry across the border. The facility was the Bryansk chemical plant, a sanctioned enterprise involved in gunpowder, explosives, and components for rocket fuel used in artillery and missile stockpiles. Open reports stressed both the strategic value and the symbolism of reaching it. Weeks earlier, London's sanctions list had placed the plant under an asset freeze, naming it among entities contributing to the invasion's logistics. That legal move mattered because it flagged the site to international compliance offices and insurers, constricting procurement channels for dual-use inputs and spares. When planners later weighed options, that designation helped justify risk by underscoring what the plant represented inside Russia's wartime supply chain. From an aviation perspective, the strike showcased the role of a specific missile family that had been debated for months. The Storm Shadow, also called Scalp, is a low-observable, air-launched cruise missile designed for terrain-following flight and hardened target effects, with a two-stage penetrating warhead. Public technical references describe guidance blending inertial sensors, satellite cues, and scene matching with digital terrain data to stay accurate when jamming scramble signals. Before we continue, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Open specifications place its standoff reach typically above 250 kilometers, depending on profile and launch platform. That range matters because it allows release well outside most point defense envelopes, letting the missile weave under radar horizons, crest for terminal identification, then dive onto fixed infrastructure with a delay-fused penetrator. In plain terms, it is built to slip past human-in-the-loop chaos and strike concrete, steel, or buried galleries that conventional bombs struggle to defeat. The night of the Bryansk strike fit that logic. Radar operators reportedly coped with a messy picture as decoys and drones competed for attention, a tactic seen repeatedly throughout the year as Ukraine probed layered coverage with cheaper airframes to saturate engagement cycles. The concept is simple. Force expensive interceptors to chase many low-value tracks while higher-value munitions ride the confusion beneath scanning beams. Independent reporting after the event echoed that a massed package breached defenses. Damage assessment in wartime is rarely immediate, and official statements were careful, but the target's role is relatively fixed. The plant's outputs feed propellants and energetic materials into multiple chains, from multiple launch rocket systems to missile engines and certain ammunition lines. Hitting such a node does not end production by itself, yet it complicates throughput, reallocates stockpiles, and forces Russia to reposition scarce air defense systems away from the front to shield factories deeper in the rear. This operation also sat within a wider pattern in which Ukraine expanded long-range strikes against industrial and logistics infrastructure inside Russia through 2025. The emphasis shifted from purely attritional frontline fires to selective hits intended to slow refurbishment and munition output. Across the autumn, open sources recorded additional deep strikes, reflecting loosened political restrictions on certain Western systems and a growing domestic arsenal of drones and repurposed missiles. Another strand of that pattern was adaptation of indigenous systems. By late September, officials and outlets described a land attack variant of the Neptune anti-ship missile used against a factory complex in Karachev, also in Bryansk. That disclosure highlighted a parallel track, reducing dependence on foreign supply by stretching the range and payload options of homegrown missiles while still integrating Western munitions where policy permitted. It signaled a longer campaign, not a one-off. Observers also pointed to the psychological and economic layers. Even when intercept claims are high, a single cruise missile reaching a critical node can impose costly dispersion measures, redundant builds, and escorts for freight over hundreds of kilometers. Russia's decision set becomes harder: protect rear industry at the expense of frontline coverage, or risk further losses among plants that cannot be easily duplicated. Reporting around the Bryansk hit framed precisely that tension in the weeks after. The defensive reaction included deploying more low-altitude surveillance and early warning assets across Russia's western sectors, a rational attempt to fill valleys in radar coverage that terrain followers exploit. But the geometry remains unforgiving. Low flyers hug contours, pop up only for terminal search, and carry image libraries to verify aim points without radio chatter. That trade between radar physics and mission planning is why standoff missiles remain relevant even in dense air defense grids. Understanding the plant clarifies the stakes. Public sanction notices and industry profiles describe a site tied to the production of gunpowder, high-energy materials, and additives used in rocket propellants, linking it to Russia's ability to sustain fires over long campaigns. Striking such a facility fits a strategy that prioritizes choke points rather than spectacle, where the effect is felt weeks later when resupply tempos slip and repair depots ration energetics for priority lines. The campaign's depth was not limited to Bryansk. In late August, Ukrainian military intelligence claimed responsibility for destroying an underground explosive storage site at the Alexin chemical complex in Tula region, with multiple outlets amplifying details about pyroxylin stocks and subterranean galleries. While independent valuation of losses remains contested, the method illustrated a hunt for concealed depots that anchor regional supply. That pattern contextualizes the later Bryansk strike. Well before Bryansk, a drone attack on the Toropets depot in 2024 produced seismic signatures detectable on regional instruments, a reminder that strikes against stored energetics can turn into self-sustaining fires and secondary blasts. Those events are not identical in layout or defenses, yet they share logistics logic: deprive the adversary of propellant and filled munitions, and frontline commanders must choose between conserving rounds or accepting longer pauses between salvos. Technically, the resilience of terrain-matching guidance under jamming pressure matters as much as warhead design. Public brochures and analyses note that Storm Shadow's navigation stack can fall back on inertial sensors and scene correlation when satellite updates are noisy, a feature tailored to dense electronic warfare. In practical terms, the landscape itself becomes the map, letting the missile ride valleys, rivers, and ridgelines, even inside a radio frequency storm designed to blind less autonomous weapons. As for cost exchange, the economics favor attackers who pair a few high-value missiles with swarms of low-cost drones programmed to stimulate radars and tempt intercepts. Every time a defender spends an expensive interceptor on an expendable drone, magazine depth shrinks for the threats that actually matter. Open reporting around January and October documented precisely these mixed raids combining drones, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles to stretch Russian magazines and operator endurance. The environmental and civilian risk dimension is real and recorded in prior attacks on energy and industrial nodes across the theater. Independent assessments measuring war-related emissions and collateral contamination note how burning fuel stocks, propellant, and damaged infrastructure impose long-tail costs on ecosystems and communities downwind. That context does not resolve battlefield decisions, but it explains why planners choose timing and aim points to limit spillover while still striking strategic capacity. Pulling back, the Bryansk strike was less about a single night than about a maturing doctrine. It fused sanctions intelligence, target validation, and a layered strike package into an operational template that can be reproduced against other choke points. Follow-on media and official notes framed it as part of a deliberate effort to make Russia guard factories as closely as front lines, trading offensive tempo for rear area protection. That trade is visible in asset redeployments and public messaging since. Even if final damage tallies remain contested, the strategic signal was clear. A plant linked to energetic materials, already blacklisted abroad, could be reached, penetrated, and disrupted by standoff weapons coordinated with decoys and drones. For defenders, that means more sensors at treetop level, more hardened enclosures, and more dispersion. For attackers, it affirms that precision, timing, and information can reshape the battlefield without occupying new ground. The strike did not appear out of nowhere. It was the endpoint of months of mapping, signals collection, and legal flagging that turned a remote industrial target into an intelligence priority, then an actionable objective. Open military reporting and regional coverage described a layered package combining long-range Western-supplied standoff munitions and locally developed unmanned systems to create confusion and open a window for deep penetration. Public assessments after the event placed operational emphasis on synchronized timing and sensor fusion rather than sheer tonnage. Analysts pointed out that when defenders are forced to choose between chasing many low-cost tracks and preserving interceptors, the attacker wins time and angles. The Bryansk episode reinforced that calculus, showing how a handful of precision weapons, if shepherded by cheap expendables and real-time reconnaissance, can alter theater logistics. Estimates of material loss circulated widely in open reporting and social feeds, with some figures in the media suggesting damage on the order of $700 million, while official tallies remained cautious and varied by outlet. Whatever the precise accounting, the immediate operational impact was clear. Outputs feeding multiple munitions lines were degraded, stocks of finished rockets and propellant were affected, and nearby logistics nodes paused movements amid contamination concerns. The physics and guidance that allowed standoff cruise weapons to reach rear industrial targets under heavy jamming is well known among engineers and was visible here in practice. When satellite navigation is disrupted, advanced missiles fall back to inertial navigation and terrain correlation. That blend of autonomy and preloaded imagery gives a missile the ability to navigate by the ground itself, using valleys, rivers, and roads as a map, and keeping terminal error within small margins even when external signals are denied. Electronic warfare shaped both sides' decisions. Defensive jamming can blind receivers and break data links, but it also signals where radars are active, which anti-radiation weapons can exploit. Attackers use decoys and emission-seeking munitions in sequence, so that when radar operators tried to track a perceived mass of targets, they revealed positions that could be punished by missiles hunting emissions. That tactical inversion forced Russian crews into a no-win choice between maintaining coverage and inviting destruction. From a logistics viewpoint, striking a single choke point has ripple effects measured in weeks and months. Factories producing energetics are capital-intensive and require controlled environments and specialist inputs. Even temporary shutdowns slow production runs and force rationing of finished assemblies across fronts. The downstream result is either reduced sortie rates, fewer artillery salvos, or reallocation of scarce precision stock to the highest priority units, choices that can reshape tactical options along an entire front. The defenders' responses were predictable in shape: redeploy low-altitude radars, add early warning flights, and harden or disperse vulnerable sites. Official and open-source reporting showed Russian commands moving mobile radars and early warning aircraft closer to industrial belts and attempting to mask key facilities. But these adjustments are costly and take time to implement, especially across a theater already under strain. which means new vulnerabilities persist while resources are shifted. Strategically, operations that target the industrial base signal an evolution from attrition to systemic disruption. Rather than attempt to destroy every launcher or vehicle, the attacker looks for leverage points that force the opponent into expensive defensive postures or production bottlenecks. That approach can be decisive not by immediate casualty counts, but by imposing replacement costs, slowing resupply, and forcing strategic trade-offs in how and where to defend. The environmental aftermath of hits on chemical or propellant sites is a compounding headache. Fires that consume energetic materials can release toxic plumes and contaminate waterways, complicating recovery and cleanup while creating health risks for nearby populations. Independent monitors and environmental analysts flagged downstream water contamination and long-lived pollution vectors in similar past incidents, underlining how industrial strikes can produce humanitarian and ecological consequences that extend far beyond the blast radius. Operational lessons for both sides emerged quickly. Attackers reinforced the value of mixed packages that combine high-end precision missiles with low-cost sensory and decoy swarms, paired to real-time ISR so that munitions are applied at the most disruptive moments. Defenders were reminded that layered systems optimized for large, conventional threats require adaptation to a more complex sky full of small, fast, and cheap vehicles that behave differently and force different countermeasures. In the medium term, the strike is likely to accelerate both dispersion and industrial redundancy planning. Facilities that concentrated a high percentage of critical output became targets precisely because their damage causes cascading shortages. Planners observing the strike can be expected to recommend splitting production across multiple sites, adding redundancy, and investing in hardened, concealed, or mobile production modules, measures that are expensive and time-consuming but reduce single-point failures. Finally, the Bryansk episode illustrates a central reality of modern conflict. Tactical creativity, intelligence fusion, and economical use of technology can produce outsized effects against a numerically larger adversary. It does not erase the broader costs of war, nor does it remove political and humanitarian consequences, but it does reshape how campaigns are conducted, where vulnerabilities lie, and how future industrial theater will be guarded and targeted. The strategic lesson is clear. Information and adaptation are force multipliers in their own right.